My hands trembled as I stared at the notification on my phone screen. After 8 years of complete silence, my mother had finally reached out. The message read exactly like a knife, twisting in old wounds. "Family Christmas party at 6:30. We have something important to discuss." The timestamp showed she sent it exactly 12 hours after Forbes published their 30 under 30 list, featuring my name and photo. 8 years of treating me like I was dead, and now suddenly they wanted to talk. I had 30 minutes to decide whether to walk back into the house that had once been my home or continue living as the ghost they had made me. The irony burned through my chest like acid. They declared me dead when I chose my dreams over their expectations, but here I was more alive than ever. The memories crashed over me like a tidal wave as I sat in my Tesla outside their pristine suburban mansion in Westchester County. 8 years ago, I was 25 years old and about to make the biggest mistake of my life, or so they thought. The scene played out in vivid detail in my mind. It was a Sunday dinner in December, snow falling gently outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of our dining room. My father, Dr. Harold Brennan, sat at the head of our mahogany table like a king holding court. His surgical hands were folded precisely, and his steel-gray eyes held that familiar look of disappointment. My mother, Margaret, positioned herself like a prosecutor preparing for cross-examination. Her black hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, and her burgundy dress made her look more like she was attending a board meeting than a family dinner. My older brother Marcus lounged in his chair with the confidence of someone who had never disappointed anyone. At 28, he was already a partner at Morris & Kyle and Associates, one of Manhattan's most prestigious law firms. His brown hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit impeccable even on a Sunday evening. He kept checking his phone throughout dinner, but I thought nothing of it at the time. So, Jet. My father began cutting his prime rib with surgical precision. "How are your studies progressing at Johns Hopkins? The cardiac surgery rotation should be starting soon." My stomach twisted into knots. This was the moment I had been dreading for months. "Actually, Dad, I need to tell you something important. I've been accepted into the medical program, but I've decided not to continue." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's fork clattered against her china plate. Marcus looked up from his phone with sudden interest, his green eyes gleaming with something I couldn't identify. "What exactly are you saying, son?" My father's voice was dangerously calm. "I'm saying I want to start a technology company. I've been developing software that could revolutionize supply chain management. The applications are endless. We could help disaster relief organizations get resources to people, faster help hospitals manage their inventory more efficiently, help shipping companies reduce waste and environmental impact." My passion poured out like water from a broken dam. I talked about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the potential to save thousands of lives through better logistics. I explained my business plan, my market research, my prototype, that was already showing incredible results. Marcus was recording everything on his phone, but he held it low, pretending to text. I was too caught up in my presentation to notice the red recording light. "This is absurd!" My mother interrupted, her voice sharp as broken glass. "You're throwing away a guaranteed career in medicine to chase some fantasy about computers. Do you understand what you're giving up? The Brennan name has meant something in this community for 3 generations. "I understand exactly what I'm giving up, Mom, but I also understand what I'm gaining. This isn't just about money or success. This is about making a real difference in the world." My father set down his knife and fork with deliberate precision. "Let me make something very clear, Jet. The Brennan family has built its reputation on service to others through medicine and law. We save lives and uphold justice. We do not chase get-rich-quick schemes in Silicon Valley." "This isn't a get-rich-quick scheme, Dad. I've been working on this for 2 years. I've already secured preliminary funding from 3 investors who believe in the technology." That was a slight exaggeration, but I was desperate to make them understand. Marcus finally spoke up, his voice smooth as silk. "Jet, I think what Mom and Dad are trying to say is that family legacy matters. When you carry the Brennan name, you have certain responsibilities. What responsibilities? I shot back. The responsibility to live someone else's dream. The responsibility to pretend I'm someone I'm not. My father stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The responsibility to honor the sacrifices we made to give you every opportunity in life. The responsibility to appreciate that we mortgaged this house to pay for your education. The responsibility to understand that we've already told our colleagues and friends that our son is going to be a cardiac surgeon. I never asked you to tell anyone that. I never made that promise. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of anger, not sadness. After everything we've given you, this is how you repay us by embarrassing us in front of our entire social circle, by throwing away the future we've worked so hard to provide. You worked hard to provide the future you wanted for me, not the future I wanted for myself. The words hung in the air like a poison cloud. Marcus continued recording, capturing every heated exchange, every raised voice, every moment of family dysfunction. My father's face turned red with rage. If you walk away from medical school, you walk away from this family. We will not support this foolishness financially or otherwise. I'm not asking for your financial support. I'm asking for your emotional support. I'm asking you to believe in me. Believe in what some ridiculous dream about changing the world with a computer program. Grow up, Jet. The world doesn't need another failed entrepreneur. It needs doctors who can save lives. The conversation spiraled into shouting. I accused them of never listening to me, never trying to understand what I actually wanted. They accused me of being selfish, ungrateful, and delusional. Marcus sat quietly in the corner, still recording, still capturing every painful moment. Finally, my mother delivered the ultimatum that would haunt me for the next 8 years. You have 1 week to come to your senses and return to Johns Hopkins. If you don't, then as far as we're concerned, you are no longer our son. We will tell people that Jet Brennan died in a car accident, and we will hold a funeral service to make it official. I thought she was speaking metaphorically. I was wrong. 3 days later, when I didn't return to medical school, they followed through on their threat. They held an actual funeral service at St. Patrick's Cathedral. They invited friends, colleagues, and extended family members. They had a closed casket ceremony and told everyone that I had been killed in a tragic accident in Baltimore. Marcus inherited my trust fund, my college fund, and my designated portion of the family estate. He also took the recorded conversation and edited it, carefully removing all context and keeping only the parts where I sounded disrespectful and ungrateful. He played these edited clips for our parents, repeatedly reinforcing their belief that I was an ungrateful child who had chosen to abandon them. I found out about the funeral from my college roommate who saw the obituary online and called me in tears. When I showed up at the house the next day to confront them, my father answered the door and looked right through me as if I were invisible. "I'm sorry," he said calmly, "but I think you have the wrong address. No one named Jet Brennan lives here." Then he closed the door in my face. That was the last time I spoke to any member of my family until today, 8 years later, when suddenly they had something important to discuss. The first few years after leaving home were the hardest of my life. I moved to Austin, Texas with everything I owned packed into 2 suitcases and a laptop bag. My savings account held exactly $3,007, which had to cover rent, food, and business expenses until I could get my company off the ground. I rented a studio apartment above a Vietnamese restaurant for $400 a month. The place was barely 300 square feet, with a Murphy bed that folded down from the wall, and a kitchenette that consisted of a hot plate, a mini fridge, and a sink that constantly dripped. The smell of faux broth seeped through the floorboards every morning at 5:30 when the restaurant started cooking, but I actually found it comforting. It reminded me that other people were working hard to build something meaningful. My company, Rapid Logistics, existed only as lines of code on my laptop and a business plan I had refined countless times. The concept was revolutionary, at least in my mind. Traditional supply chain management relied on outdated systems that couldn't adapt quickly to changing circumstances. My software used machine learning algorithms to predict disruptions, optimize routes in real time, and automatically reroute resources when problems arose. The first 6 months were brutal. I lived on ramen noodles, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever free food I could find at networking events. I attended every startup meetup, every tech conference, and every entrepreneurship workshop in the Austin area. I pitched my idea to anyone who would listen, from venture capitalists to fellow entrepreneurs to random people at coffee shops. Most people didn't understand what I was trying to build. Supply chain management sounded boring compared to social media apps or gaming platforms. But I knew that boring problems often had the most valuable solutions. My first breakthrough came when I met Jennifer Walsh, a former logistics coordinator for the American Red Cross. She was attending a Women in Tech meetup, where I was giving a presentation about disaster relief applications for supply chain optimization. After my talk, she approached me with tears in her eyes. During Hurricane Katrina, we lost track of thousands of supply shipments because our systems couldn't handle the chaos, she said. People died waiting for resources that were sitting in warehouses 50 miles away because we didn't know they were there. What you're building could save lives. Jennifer became my first real advisor and helped me understand the practical challenges that aid organizations faced during emergencies. She introduced me to contacts at FEMA, the United Nations World Food Program, and various non-profit disaster relief organizations. But even with her guidance, progress was painfully slow. I spent 18 hours a day coding, testing, and refining my algorithms. I learned Python, Java, and SQL through online tutorials and trial and error. I studied logistics textbooks until my eyes burned, and I analyzed case studies of supply chain failures until I could recite them from memory. The lowest point came in my second year when I ran out of money completely. I had been so focused on building the perfect product that I hadn't paid enough attention to generating revenue. I was 3 months behind on rent, and my landlord was threatening eviction. I hadn't bought groceries in 2 weeks and was surviving on free samples from Whole Foods and the occasional meal from the Vietnamese restaurant downstairs when the owner took pity on me. I was forced to sell my car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that had been my graduation gift from college, to pay rent and keep the lights on. Walking everywhere in the Texas heat while carrying a laptop bag felt like the universe was testing my commitment to my dreams. But then I discovered something that changed everything. I was reviewing my financial records from the early days, trying to figure out where I had gone wrong with my budgeting, when I noticed something strange about one of my initial investors. A man named Harold Bergen had invested $15,000 in Rapid Logistics during my first month in Austin. He claimed to be a retired executive from a Fortune 500 company who believed in supporting young entrepreneurs. Harold Bergen had seemed like a godsend at the time. He asked intelligent questions about my technology, provided valuable feedback on my business model, and even introduced me to potential clients in the logistics industry. But 6 months later, he suddenly pulled his investment, claiming that he had concerns about the market viability of my product. Losing his funding had nearly destroyed my company. I had been counting on his support to hire my first employee and move into a real office space. Instead, I was forced to continue working alone from my tiny apartment. But as I stared at Harold Bergen's contact information in my records, something clicked. The phone number had a New York area code. The email address was harold.bergen@consultingedgemail.com. And the signature on his investment agreement was eerily familiar. I pulled up my laptop and started searching for any information I could find about Harold Bergen online. There were no LinkedIn profiles, no company websites, no trace of anyone by that name working in the logistics industry. The address he had provided traced back to a UPS store in Westchester County, New York. Westchester County, the same county where my parents lived. My heart started pounding as the pieces fell into place. I searched through my old files and found a birthday card my father had sent me in college. The handwriting was identical to Harold Bergen's signature. My father had been sabotaging my business from the very beginning. He had invested in my company under a false name, gained access to my business plans and financial information, and then pulled his funding at the exact moment when it would cause maximum damage. He had probably hoped that losing Harold Bergen's investment would force me to give up and return home. Instead, it had only made me more determined to succeed. But the betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. It wasn't enough for them to disown me and hold a fake funeral. My father had actively tried to destroy the dreams I had chosen over his approval. As I sat in my tiny apartment that night, eating cold ramen noodles and staring at Harold Bergen's fake investment documents, I made a promise to myself. I would build Rapid Logistics into the most successful supply chain management company in the world. I would prove that I had been right to follow my passion. And someday when they realized what they had lost, it would be too late to apologize. I had no idea how right I would be about that last part. The next 3 years were a relentless grind of small victories and major setbacks. I slowly built a client base by offering my services at drastically reduced rates to nonprofit organizations and small businesses. Every successful project became a case study that I could use to attract larger clients. My first major breakthrough came when I helped coordinate disaster relief efforts after a tornado devastated Moore, Oklahoma. My software tracked supply shipments in real time and automatically rerouted resources as roads became blocked or shelters reached capacity. The result was a 30% improvement in response time compared to previous disasters. That success led to a contract with the Oklahoma Department of Emergency Management, which led to contracts with emergency management agencies in Texas, Louisiana, and Florida. Word spread slowly but steadily through the disaster relief community that there was a young entrepreneur in Austin who had developed something special. But even as my client base grew, I still struggled financially. I was reinvesting every penny back into the business hiring freelance programmers to help expand the platform and upgrading my technology infrastructure to handle larger deployments. I moved to a slightly larger apartment, this one, with an actual bedroom and a kitchen that didn't smell like restaurant cooking. But I still lived like a college student eating cheap food and wearing the same 5 shirts on rotation. Every dollar I saved on personal expenses was a dollar I could invest in growing the company. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was living in poverty while building technology that was worth millions. But I knew that sustainable success took time to build, and I was willing to sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term achievement. What I didn't know was that my success was being monitored very carefully by people who had a vested interest in seeing me fail. By year 4, Rapid Logistics had grown from a one-person operation into a legitimate company with 12 employees and an office in downtown Austin. We had developed partnerships with major shipping companies, technology vendors, and government agencies. Our client base included everyone from local food banks to international aid organizations. The breakthrough moment came when Hurricane Harvey devastated Houston in August of 2017. Texas Governor Greg Abbott's office contacted us directly, asking if our software could help coordinate the massive relief effort. Over 70,000 people were displaced, and traditional logistics systems were completely overwhelmed. I deployed every member of my team to Houston, and we set up a command center in the George R. Brown Convention Center alongside FEMA, the Red Cross, and the Salvation Army. For 5 straight days, we worked around the clock to track supply shipments, coordinate volunteer efforts, and optimize distribution routes. Our algorithms processed data from hundreds of sources, satellite imagery showing flooded roads, weather forecasts predicting storm movement, shelter capacity reports updating every 15 minutes, and supply inventory counts from dozens of warehouses across Texas. The results were extraordinary. We reduced average delivery time for emergency supplies by 45%. We eliminated duplicate shipments that had plagued previous disaster responses. Most importantly, we ensured that no shelter ran out of critical supplies like clean water, baby formula, or medical equipment. The media coverage was intense. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News all ran stories about the young tech entrepreneur whose software was revolutionizing disaster relief. The Wall Street Journal published a front-page article titled, "Austin Startup Saves Lives in Harvey Aftermath." Time magazine included me in their list of next-generation leaders for 2018. But with visibility came new challenges I had never anticipated. Within months of the Harvey coverage, I started noticing problems with our technology that shouldn't have existed. Code that had worked perfectly for years suddenly developed bugs. Algorithms that had been tested thousands of times began producing inconsistent results. Database queries that should have taken seconds started timing out after minutes. At first, I assumed we were dealing with normal growing pains. As our client base expanded, our systems were processing exponentially more data than they had been designed to handle. I hired additional programmers and database administrators to optimize our infrastructure. But the problems persisted and seemed to follow a disturbing pattern. Every time we were about to launch a major update or sign a significant new client, something would go wrong. A server would crash unexpectedly. A crucial dataset would become corrupted. A security vulnerability would suddenly appear in code that had been working flawlessly. The most devastating incident occurred in March of 2019, just 2 weeks before we were scheduled to demonstrate our platform for the United Nations World Food Program. The contract was worth $12 million and would have established Rapid Logistics as the global leader in humanitarian logistics technology. 3 days before the demonstration, our entire database was corrupted by what appeared to be a sophisticated cyber attack. Years of client data algorithm improvements and proprietary code were destroyed in a matter of hours. Our backup systems had been compromised as well, leaving us with nothing but outdated versions of our software that couldn't handle the complexity of the UN demonstration. I spent 72 hours straight trying to recover the data, consuming nothing but energy drinks and determination. My team worked alongside me, but it was hopeless. We had to cancel the UN demonstration and explain to potential clients that we had suffered a major security breach. The incident nearly destroyed our reputation in the international aid community. Several existing clients canceled their contracts, citing concerns about data security. Potential investors backed out of funding discussions. 2 of my best programmers quit to join more stable companies. But what devastated me most was the discovery I made 6 months later. I had hired a cybersecurity firm called Thornfield Investigations to conduct a forensic analysis of the attack. Their lead investigator, Michael Rodriguez, was a former FBI agent who specialized in corporate espionage and intellectual property theft. After 3 months of analysis, Michael presented me with a report that turned my world upside down. "Jet, this wasn't a random cyber attack," he said during our meeting in his downtown office. "Someone with intimate knowledge of your systems has been conducting surveillance for at least 2 years. They knew exactly where your vulnerabilities were because they had been creating them." "What do you mean creating them?" Michael pulled up a presentation on his laptop screen. "The attack came from inside your own network. Someone with administrative access had been planting backdoors in your code, creating security vulnerabilities, and gradually compromising your infrastructure. When they were ready to strike, they had everything they needed to destroy your database and make it look like an external attack." My blood ran cold. "Who had administrative access?" "That's where it gets interesting. The attacks were traced back to a series of IP addresses registered to something called Bergen Consulting Services. Does that name mean anything to you?" Bergen, Harold Bergen, my father's fake investment identity from years earlier. "Can you trace the actual location of these IP addresses?" "Already did. They all trace back to the same office building in Midtown Manhattan. The building directory shows Bergen Consulting Services sharing office space with Morris & Kyle and Associates. Morris & Kyle and Associates, my brother Marcus's law firm. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Marcus had been conducting corporate espionage against my company for years. He had been stealing my innovations, selling them to competitors, and systematically sabotaging my systems whenever I got close to major success. There's something else, Michael continued. We found evidence that your proprietary algorithms have been sold to at least 6 different companies over the past 3 years. The sales were conducted through Bergen Consulting Services, and the profits were deposited into offshore accounts linked to Marcus Brennan. I sat in stunned silence as Michael showed me financial records, email exchanges, and technical documentation proving that my brother had stolen millions of dollars worth of intellectual property. He had been selling my life's work to my competitors, while simultaneously sabotaging my company to prevent me from discovering his theft. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated that I felt physically sick. It wasn't enough for my family to disown me and cut me out of their lives. They had been actively trying to destroy everything I had built to replace them. But as I sat in Michael Rodriguez's office that day, surrounded by evidence of my brother's crimes, I realized something important. Despite everything they had thrown at me, I was still here. Despite the sabotage, the stolen code, and the destroyed databases, Rapid Logistics had survived. And now I knew exactly who my enemies were. Michael, I need you to document everything. Every attack, every stolen algorithm, every financial transaction. I want a complete record of what they've done. What are you planning to do with this information? I'm going to rebuild everything they destroyed. I'm going to create something so innovative and so valuable that their stolen code will look like children's toys in comparison. And when I've achieved the kind of success they can't sabotage or steal, then I'll decide whether they deserve to know the truth about what they've lost. I walked out of that office with a new sense of purpose. I wasn't just building a company anymore. I was building proof that I had been right to choose my dreams over their approval. What I didn't know was that my proof would come sooner than I expected, and in a way that would force them to confront the consequences of their choices, whether they wanted to or not. The year 2020 changed everything, though not in the way I had expected. When the COVID-19 pandemic shut down the global economy, supply chains around the world collapsed almost overnight. Hospitals couldn't get personal protective equipment. Grocery stores ran out of essential items. Pharmaceutical companies struggled to distribute vaccines efficiently. While most businesses were laying off employees and cutting costs, Rapid Logistics was suddenly in higher demand than ever before. Our algorithms were perfectly designed to handle the kind of chaotic, rapidly changing logistics challenges that the pandemic created. I made the decision to offer our services for free to any hospital, clinic, or healthcare organization that needed help managing their supply chains during the crisis. It was a massive financial risk, but I knew it was the right thing to do. The results were extraordinary. We helped coordinate the distribution of over 50 million masks, 10 million gowns, and countless other medical supplies to healthcare workers across 38 states. Our software optimized vaccine distribution routes, tracked cold storage requirements, and ensured that high-risk populations received priority access. But the project that truly changed my life began in September of 2021, when Hurricane Ida devastated Louisiana and left over 1 million people without power. I deployed our entire team to New Orleans just as I had done during Hurricane Harvey 4 years earlier. But this time we had something new, a revolutionary artificial intelligence system that could predict supply shortages before they occurred. The AI system, which I had spent 2 years developing in secret, analyzed thousands of variables in real-time weather patterns, population, density, infrastructure, damage, historical consumption, data, and social media sentiment analysis. It could predict with 92% accuracy which neighborhoods would run out of specific supplies and exactly when those shortages would occur. The system allowed us to pre-position resources and redirect shipments before shortages became critical. For the first time in the history of disaster relief, we eliminated supply shortages entirely in our coverage area. No one went without clean water medical supplies or emergency food because our AI system ensured that resources arrived exactly where and when they were needed. The media coverage was unlike anything I had ever experienced. 60 Minutes did a feature story about our AI system titled "The Algorithm That Saves Lives." The New York Times called it the most significant advancement in humanitarian logistics since the invention of the helicopter. But the story that changed everything was written by Sarah Chen, an investigative journalist for Forbes magazine. Sarah was different from the other journalists who had covered rapid logistics. Where others focused on the technology or the business success, Sarah was interested in the human story behind the innovation. She spent 3 weeks following me around Austin, New Orleans, and our various client sites, conducting interviews with everyone from my employees to the aid workers who used our software. I want to understand what drives someone to dedicate their life to solving problems that most people don't even know exist, she said during one of our conversations. Supply chain optimization isn't exactly a glamorous field, but you talk about it like you're describing a religious calling. Sarah was 32 years old, with shoulder-length black hair and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to see right through whatever facade you were trying to maintain. She had graduated from Columbia Journalism School and spent 5 years covering technology and business for the Wall Street Journal before joining Forbes. What made her different wasn't just her intelligence or her interviewing skills. It was her genuine curiosity about people and her ability to find the deeper story beneath the surface facts. As she researched my background for the Forbes article, Sarah uncovered details about my family situation that I had never discussed publicly. She found records of my parents' fake funeral service, discovered the connection between Harold Bergen and my father, and even tracked down former classmates from Johns Hopkins who remembered my abrupt departure from medical school. "Jet, I need to ask you about something sensitive," she said during our final interview. "I've been investigating your family background, and I found some things that don't add up. According to public records, your parents held a funeral service for you in 2014, claiming you had died in a car accident. But obviously you're very much alive. Can you help me understand what happened?" I had never told the complete story to anyone outside of my closest friends and employees. But there was something about Sarah's approach that made me trust her with the truth. She wasn't looking for scandal or sensationalism. She genuinely wanted to understand how my family situation had shaped my journey as an entrepreneur. So I told her everything. The dinner confrontation, the ultimatum, the fake funeral, the years of silence. I told her about Harold Bergen's sabotage and Marcus's theft of my intellectual property. I explained how the pain of losing my family had motivated me to build something meaningful with my life. Sarah listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions and taking careful notes. When I finished, she sat quietly for several minutes, processing what I had shared. "Jet, there's something else I need to tell you. During my research, I found some court documents that I think you should see." She pulled out a folder filled with photocopied legal papers and spread them across the conference room table. "These are your adoption records from when you were 3 years old. Your biological parents, David and Laura Mitchell, died in a car accident in 2001. The Brennans adopted you 6 months later." My world stopped spinning. "What are you talking about? I wasn't adopted. Harold and Margaret are my biological parents." Sarah's expression was gentle but firm. "I'm afraid they're not, Jet. And there's more. Your biological father, David Mitchell, held 17 patents for supply chain optimization technology. He was a pioneer in computer-assisted logistics systems and founded a company called Mitchell Innovations that was eventually acquired by IBM for $85 million. The room started spinning around me. Everything I thought I knew about myself was wrong. The insurance settlement from your biological parents' deaths combined with the IBM acquisition money was placed in a trust fund for your benefit. According to these documents, you should have received access to approximately $30 million on your 30th birthday. My 30th birthday was 6 months ago. I know, which means Harold and Margaret Brennan have been illegally controlling your inheritance for almost 2 years. Sarah showed me bank records, trust documents, and correspondence between the Brennans and their attorneys. For 20 years, my adoptive parents had been living off the interest from my biological parents' money, while telling me nothing about my true heritage. The cruel irony was overwhelming. My natural talent for supply chain optimization wasn't just random aptitude. It was literally in my genes. David Mitchell had been working on the same problems I had devoted my life to solving 30 years before I was even born. And the family that had rejected me for choosing technology over medicine had been profiting from my biological father's innovations for my entire life. Sarah, why are you showing me this? This goes way beyond anything that would appear in a Forbes article. She closed the folder and looked directly into my eyes. Because you deserve to know the truth about who you are. And because I think your story is about much more than business success. It's about someone who lost everything and built a new life based on authenticity and passion rather than external expectations. The Forbes article was published 3 weeks later under the headline, "The Orphan Algorithm: How Family Rejection Led to Humanitarian Innovation." Sarah had managed to tell my story in a way that was both deeply personal and powerfully inspiring. She focused on the connection between my biological father's work and my own innovations. The irony of my adoptive family profiting from the very field they had rejected me for choosing, and the way that personal trauma had motivated me to build technology that could prevent other people's suffering. The article included stunning photographs of our disaster relief operations, detailed explanations of our AI algorithms, and interviews with aid workers whose lives had been changed by our technology. But it also included enough details about my family situation to make it clear that Harold Margaret and Marcus Brennan had behaved in ways that were both morally questionable and potentially illegal. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours of publication, I received phone calls from venture capitalists' acquisition offers from major technology companies and interview requests from every major media outlet in the country. But the most important response came exactly 12 hours after the article was published, in the form of a text message from my mother. "Family Christmas party at 6:30. We have something important to discuss." 24 hours later, I would discover that their important discussion wasn't about reconciliation or apology. It was about avoiding prison. The morning after receiving my mother's text, I was sitting in my office reviewing acquisition offers when my assistant Patricia Williams knocked on my door with an unusual expression on her face. "Jet, there's an FBI agent here to see you. She says it's regarding a financial crimes investigation." My first thought was that someone was trying to scam me, taking advantage of my sudden visibility in the media. But when Patricia showed Agent Diana Torres into my office, I knew immediately that this was legitimate. Agent Torres was a woman in her early 40s with short auburn hair and the kind of steady gaze that suggested she had seen everything and wasn't easily impressed. She wore a navy blue suit and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it contained serious business. "Mr. Brennan, thank you for taking the time to meet with me. I'm Agent Diana Torres with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. I'm investigating a complex case involving embezzlement, money laundering, and corporate fraud, and your family's name has come up in connection with several serious allegations." My stomach dropped. "What kind of allegations?" Agent Torres opened her briefcase and pulled out several manila folders. "We've been investigating Dr. Harold Brennan for the past 8 months, based on a tip from a whistleblower at Westchester General Hospital. The allegations include embezzlement of hospital funds, insurance fraud, and the illegal diversion of trust fund assets." She spread photographs and financial documents across my desk. Dr. Brennan has been systematically stealing money from the hospital's equipment budget and using those funds to cover gambling debts at various Atlantic City casinos. The total amount embezzled is approximately $2.7 million over a 5-year period. The photographs showed my father at blackjack tables, roulette wheels, and poker tournaments. In some images, he was clearly intoxicated, throwing chips around like confetti. The financial records showed a pattern of large withdrawals from hospital accounts, followed immediately by casino deposits. But that's not the most serious charge, Agent Torres continued. We've also discovered that Dr. Brennan and his wife, Margaret, have been illegally accessing a trust fund that belongs to their adopted son. According to our investigation, they've withdrawn over $22 million from that trust fund without authorization. She showed me copies of the same trust documents that Sarah Chen had discovered, along with bank records, showing years of unauthorized withdrawals, forged signatures, and fraudulent transfer authorizations. The trust fund was established by David and Laura Mitchell for their son, who was adopted by the Brennans after his biological parents died in a car accident. The fund was supposed to remain untouched until the beneficiary turned 30 years old. Agent Torres, I think there's been some confusion. I am that beneficiary. I'm the adopted son you're talking about. Agent Torres paused and studied my face carefully. Mr. Brennan, when was the last time you had contact with Harold and Margaret Brennan? Yesterday, when my mother sent me a text message inviting me to a family Christmas party. Before that, we hadn't spoken in 8 years. 8 years? Can you explain what happened 8 years ago? I told Agent Torres the same story I had told Sarah Chen, but with even more detail about my father's sabotage of my business and my brother's theft of my intellectual property. As I spoke, she took careful notes and asked follow-up questions about dates, financial transactions, and specific conversations. Mr. Brennan, I need to ask you something important. Did you know that you were entitled to inherit approximately $30 million 6 months ago? I found out 3 weeks ago when a journalist researched my background for a magazine article. Before that, I had no idea I was adopted, or that my biological parents had left me any inheritance. Agent Torres leaned back in her chair and studied me for a long moment. This is remarkable. We've been investigating your adoptive parents for financial crimes, but we had no idea that the actual beneficiary of the trust fund was unaware of its existence. This changes the entire scope of our investigation. She pulled out another folder and showed me surveillance photographs of Marcus entering and leaving various office buildings in Manhattan. We've also been investigating your brother Marcus Brennan for corporate espionage and patent theft. Based on information provided by several of his former clients, he's been selling stolen intellectual property through a fake consulting company for at least 4 years. The photographs showed Marcus meeting with representatives from logistics companies that I recognized as rapid logistics competitors. Some of them were companies that had used my stolen algorithms to undercut my pricing and win contracts that should have been mine. The total value of the intellectual property theft is estimated at over $15 million. Your brother has been very careful to cover his tracks, but we have enough evidence to build a strong case against him. Agent Torres closed the folders and looked directly at me. Mr. Brennan, I believe your adoptive family's sudden interest in reconciliation is directly related to our investigation. Someone has been feeding them information about our progress, probably their attorney. They know we're close to making arrests, and they're hoping to manipulate you into helping them avoid prosecution. What kind of manipulation? They might ask you to provide character references for court proceedings. They might claim that the trust fund money was used for your benefit somehow, even though you never received it. They might even try to convince you to publicly forgive them as part of some kind of family reconciliation story that their attorneys could use to generate sympathy during sentencing. The cynical calculation behind my mother's text message became crystal clear. They weren't reaching out because they missed me, or because they were proud of my success. They were reaching out because they needed me to help them stay out of prison. Agent Torres, what would happen if I went to this family party tonight? Honestly, it would probably help our case. If you're willing to wear a wire and document their attempts to manipulate you, we could gather evidence of witness tampering and conspiracy charges. But I want to be clear about the risks involved. These people have already shown that they're willing to go to extreme lengths to protect themselves. I thought about everything they had put me through over the past 8 years. The fake funeral, the stolen money, the sabotaged business deals, the years of silence and rejection. Part of me wanted to walk away and let the FBI handle everything without my involvement. But another part of me knew that I needed to face them one final time. Not for their sake, but for mine. Agent Torres, I want to do this. But I want more than just evidence of witness tampering. I want them to confess to everything they've done. The embezzlement, the trust fund theft, the sabotage of my business. I want a complete record of their crimes. That's a tall order, Mr. Brennan. People don't usually confess to federal crimes just because their estranged family member shows up with a wire. I smiled for the first time since Agent Torres had walked into my office. You don't know how desperate they are, and you don't know how much they underestimate me. 3 hours later, I was fitted with a sophisticated recording device that was virtually undetectable. Agent Torres and her team would be monitoring from a van parked 2 blocks away from my parents' house, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. As I drove through the familiar streets of Westchester County for the first time in 8 years, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't the desperate 25-year-old who had been disowned for choosing his dreams. I wasn't the struggling entrepreneur who had been sabotaged by his own family. I was Jet Mitchell, son of David and Laura Mitchell, heir to a $30 million fortune and founder of the most innovative logistics company in the world. And I was about to give my adoptive family the Christmas surprise of their lives. The house looked exactly the same as it had 8 years ago, down to the same holiday wreaths hanging on the front doors, and the same string of white lights outlining the roof. But as I walked up the brick pathway, I felt like I was approaching a museum exhibit of my former life, rather than returning home. I rang the doorbell instead of using my old key, which I had thrown away years ago. When my father answered the door, his expression flickered between surprise, guilt, and something that might have been relief. Jet, you came. Hello, Harold. I deliberately used his first name instead of calling him Dad. The formality wasn't lost on him. Come in, come in. Your mother is in the living room with Marcus and his attorney. The living room had been redecorated since my last visit, but it still radiated the same cold perfection that had always made me feel like a visitor in my own home. My mother sat in her usual armchair, wearing a black cocktail dress, as if she were attending a funeral instead of a family gathering. Marcus stood by the fireplace in his navy suit, looking like he was preparing for a court appearance. Next to him stood a man I didn't recognize, clearly their lawyer, based on his expensive briefcase and nervous energy. Jet, sweetheart, you look wonderful, my mother said, but her voice lacked any warmth. Success agrees with you. Margaret. I used her first name deliberately, just as I had with my father. You wanted to discuss something important. Marcus stepped forward with his professional lawyer smile. Jet, I want to start by saying how proud we all are of what you've accomplished. That Forbes article was really something special. Was it I'm surprised you read it considering you declared me dead 8 years ago? The lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Brennan, my name is Robert Fitzgerald. I represent your family in some legal matters that have recently come to our attention. Perhaps we should all sit down and discuss the situation calmly. I remained standing. What situation would that be, Robert? My father poured himself a scotch with shaking hands. Jet, there have been some misunderstandings with the authorities. Some allegations that are completely baseless, but they could be very damaging to the family's reputation if they're not handled properly. What kind of allegations? My mother dabbed her eyes with a tissue, though I didn't see any actual tears. They're saying that your father stole money from the hospital, which is absolutely ridiculous. Harold has devoted his entire career to helping people. The idea that he would ever do anything dishonest is just absurd. And they're saying that we somehow stole money from you, which doesn't make any sense, Marcus added. We've been estranged for 8 years. How could we steal money from someone we haven't even spoken to? Robert Fitzgerald opened his briefcase and pulled out several legal documents. Mr. Brennan, what your family is hoping to discuss with you is the possibility of providing character references in their defense. As someone who has achieved such remarkable success, your testimony about their moral character could be very influential with a jury. I looked around the room at the 3 people who had shaped my childhood, destroyed my young adulthood, and spent years trying to sabotage my success. The recording device hidden in my jacket was capturing every word of their pathetic attempt to manipulate me. So let me understand this correctly. You want me to testify that you're honest, moral people who would never steal money or harm their own family? Exactly, my mother said eagerly. You know us better than anyone, Jet. You know that we would never do the things they're accusing us of. I smiled and pulled out my phone. That's interesting, Margaret, because I have something I think you should see. I opened the Forbes article and began reading aloud. According to court records obtained by Forbes, Jet Brennan was adopted by Harold and Margaret Brennan in 2001 after his biological parents, David and Laura Mitchell, died in a car accident. The Mitchells had established a $30 million trust fund for their son, which was supposed to remain untouched until he turned 30. The color drained from my father's face. Marcus sat down heavily in the nearest chair. Robert Fitzgerald looked like he wanted to disappear. The article goes on to say that Harold and Margaret Brennan have been secretly withdrawing money from this trust fund for over 20 years, despite having no legal right to access those funds. Jet, let us explain, my father stammered. That money was used for your benefit. Your education, your housing, your food, everything we provided for you came from that trust fund. Really everything, including the $2.7 million you gambled away in Atlantic City casinos. My mother gasped. Marcus looked at his father in horror. Clearly, the extent of Harold's gambling addiction had been kept secret even from the rest of the family. And what about the $15 million in intellectual property that Marcus stole from my company and sold to my competitors? Was that for my benefit too? Marcus stood up abruptly. I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out my phone again and showed them screenshots from Michael Rodriguez's investigation. Bergen Consulting Services. Ring a bell, Marcus, the fake company you created to sell my algorithms to every logistics firm on the East Coast. You can't prove anything, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Actually, I can. I have financial records, email correspondence, and forensic evidence linking every stolen algorithm back to your office computer. I also have testimony from 6 different companies confirming that they purchased my intellectual property from Bergen Consulting Services. Robert Fitzgerald was frantically scribbling notes, probably calculating how many federal crimes his clients had just confessed to in front of witnesses. But here's my favorite part. I continued. The $30 million trust fund that you've been stealing from. It was established by David Mitchell, my biological father, who held 17 patents for supply chain optimization technology. The same technology you've been telling people I was foolish to pursue. I looked directly at my father. You've been living off the inheritance of a man whose life's work you rejected me for choosing to continue. You called me delusional for wanting to follow in the footsteps of my actual father, while you were literally profiting from his innovations. My father downed his scotch in one gulp. Jet, you have to understand, we never meant for things to go this far. When we adopted you, we thought we were giving you a better life. We thought medical school was a safer choice than entrepreneurship. So you held a fake funeral and told everyone I was dead that was for my own good? That was Marcus's idea, my mother said quickly. We thought if we made it clear that we were serious about our ultimatum, you would come to your senses and return to medical school. Marcus looked betrayed. Mom, don't blame me for your decision to disown him. I'm not blaming you for that. I'm blaming you for convincing us that Jet was ungrateful and disrespectful. You edited those recordings to make him sound terrible. The family was turning on each other exactly as I had hoped they would. The recording device was capturing every confession, every admission of guilt, every attempt to shift blame to someone else. And the business sabotage? I asked. Was that for my own good too? My father looked confused. What business sabotage? Harold Bergen, the fake investor who pulled funding from my company at exactly the wrong moment. My father's face went pale. How did you find out about that? So you admit it. I was trying to teach you a lesson about the dangers of entrepreneurship. I thought if you experienced some setbacks, you would realize that business was too risky and come back to medicine. Marcus laughed bitterly. Dad, you destroyed his company because you wanted him to become a doctor. Meanwhile, I was stealing his innovations and getting rich from them. Do you see the irony here? You were what... My father turned to Marcus in shock. I was selling his algorithms to his competitors for years. I made over $15 million from Bergen Consulting Services. I thought you knew. I had no idea you were profiting from your sabotage. My sabotage. You created the Harold Bergen identity. I just borrowed it to create my consulting company. Robert Fitzgerald was now holding his head in his hands. His clients were confessing to multiple federal crimes while arguing about who was more guilty. I looked around the room at the people who had once been my family, watching them destroy each other with their revelations of betrayal and greed. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt sad. But mostly I felt free. You know what the really ironic part is, I said. I came here tonight prepared to forgive you. I thought maybe the success had given me enough perspective to move past the hurt and anger. I thought maybe we could find a way to rebuild some kind of relationship. We can still do that, my mother said desperately. We're still family, Jet. We made mistakes, but we can fix this. No, Margaret, we can't. Because you didn't make mistakes. You made choices. You chose to disown me. You chose to steal my inheritance. You chose to sabotage my business. You chose to profit from my innovations while telling me I was foolish for pursuing them. I headed toward the door, then turned back one final time. And you're going to choose to face the consequences of those choices without any help from me. As I walked out of that house for the last time, I could hear them arguing behind me, their voices rising as they realized that their last desperate gambit had failed completely. Agent Torres was waiting for me in her surveillance van, 2 blocks away, along with forensic accountant Lisa Park, who had been monitoring the audio feed. Outstanding work, Mr. Brennan, Agent Torres said, as she removed my recording device. They confessed to everything. Embezzlement, trust fund theft, intellectual property theft, conspiracy, and witness tampering. We have enough evidence to put all 3 of them away for a very long time. What happens now? Now we process the evidence and prepare arrest warrants. Based on what we recorded tonight, your father is looking at 10 to 15 years for embezzlement and fraud. Your mother is looking at 8 to 12 years for conspiracy and money laundering. Your brother is looking at 5 to 10 years for intellectual property theft and corporate espionage. Lisa Park handed me a folder filled with financial documents. We've also prepared a complete accounting of your trust fund. The good news is that most of your inheritance is recoverable. The bad news is that it might take several months to untangle all the illegal transactions. I looked at the folder, thinking about the 8 years I had spent building my company from nothing while my inheritance sat in accounts I didn't even know existed. The money would be nice, but it wasn't what mattered most. Agent Torres, when you arrest them, I want you to deliver a message. What's that? Tell them that Jet Mitchell says goodbye. 6 months later, I stood outside the federal courthouse in Manhattan watching as Harold Margaret and Marcus Brennan were led away in handcuffs after their sentencing hearing. Harold had received 12 years for embezzlement and fraud. Margaret had been sentenced to 8 years for conspiracy and money laundering. Marcus, who had cooperated with authorities and shown genuine remorse, received 5 years for intellectual property theft. The media coverage was intense, but this time I felt detached from it. The story of my family's crimes had become a cautionary tale about greed manipulation and the consequences of prioritizing money over relationships. But for me, it was simply the final chapter of a story I was ready to move beyond. Standing next to me on the courthouse steps was Sarah Chen, who had become much more than just the journalist who had uncovered my family's secrets. Over the past 6 months, she had become my closest friend, my most trusted advisor, and eventually the person I couldn't imagine living without. "How do you feel?" she asked, as we watched the news vans pack up their equipment. "Relieved, sad, grateful. It's complicated. Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" I thought about that question for a long moment. I think forgiveness is something you do for yourself, not for other people. I've let go of the anger and resentment because carrying those emotions was hurting me more than it was hurting them. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what they did or pretending it was acceptable. The past 6 months had been transformative in ways I hadn't expected. Recovering my inheritance had allowed me to expand Rapid Logistics' globally opening offices in London, Hong Kong, and São Paulo. We had developed partnerships with the United Nations, the European Union, and the African Union to provide logistics support for humanitarian missions around the world. But more importantly, I had discovered what it meant to have a real family. My employees at Rapid Logistics had rallied around me during the difficult months of testimony depositions and legal proceedings. They had worked extra hours to cover my responsibilities, supported me emotionally when the media attention became overwhelming, and celebrated with me when justice was finally served. Jennifer Walsh, my first advisor from the disaster relief community, had become like a mother figure to me. She organized the entire company for my 31st birthday party and gave a speech about how proud she was to have watched me grow from an idealistic young entrepreneur into a leader who was changing the world. Michael Rodriguez, the cybersecurity expert who had uncovered my brother's crimes, had become my head of security and one of my closest friends. He taught me how to protect myself and my company from future attacks. But he also taught me how to trust people again after experiencing such profound betrayal. Even Agent Diana Torres had stayed in touch, updating me on the progress of the case, and eventually becoming someone I could call when I needed advice about navigating the complex intersection of business and law enforcement. But most importantly, I had built a romantic relationship with Sarah Chen that was based on complete honesty, mutual respect, and shared values. She understood my commitment to using technology for humanitarian purposes because she shared my belief that success without meaning was just elaborate failure. On Christmas Eve, exactly 1 year after the confrontation at my adoptive parents' house, Sarah and I hosted a dinner party at my house in Austin for 25 people who had become my chosen family. Jennifer Walsh was there with her husband and daughter. Michael Rodriguez brought his partner and their twin boys. Agent Torres flew in from Washington with her teenage son. My entire core team from Rapid Logistics attended with their spouses and children. As I looked around the dinner table at the faces of people who had chosen to love me for who I actually was, rather than who they wanted me to be, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. During dinner, Jennifer asked me to share the story of how Rapid Logistics had started for the benefit of the younger guests who hadn't heard it before. As I told the story of leaving medical school being disowned by my family and building a company from nothing in a tiny apartment above a Vietnamese restaurant, I realized that I was no longer bitter about the pain and rejection I had experienced. Those experiences had taught me resilience, empathy, and the importance of staying true to my authentic self, even when everyone around me was pressuring me to become someone else. They had motivated me to build something meaningful rather than just profitable. They had helped me appreciate genuine love and support when I finally found it. The most important lesson I learned: I said as dessert was being served, is that family isn't about blood relationships or legal documents. Family is about the people who choose to show up for you consistently, especially when things get difficult. Family is about people who celebrate your authentic successes and support you through your authentic failures. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table and smiled at me with the kind of love that I had never thought I deserved. Family is about people who see your dreams as worthy of pursuit, even when those dreams seem impossible or impractical to everyone else. It's about people who believe in your potential to make a positive difference in the world and who want to help you achieve that potential. After dinner, as our guests mingled in the living room and played games with the children, Sarah and I stepped outside onto the back patio to enjoy the unusually mild December weather. Do you ever wonder what your life would have looked like if your adoptive parents had supported your entrepreneurship instead of rejecting it? She asked. Sometimes. But I think I needed to go through that struggle to become the person I was meant to be. If they had supported me from the beginning, I might have been satisfied with building a moderately successful company that made me wealthy. The pain of losing them motivated me to build something that could save lives and change the world. And if they had never stolen your inheritance, then I would have built Rapid Logistics with their money instead of my own determination, and I probably wouldn't have developed the same level of resilience and creativity. Some of our most innovative solutions came from having to solve problems with limited resources. I pulled out my phone and showed Sarah a photo that I kept in my wallet. It was the only picture I had of David and Laura Mitchell, my biological parents. They were standing in front of a computer lab at MIT, both wearing white lab coats and smiling at the camera. My father was holding a certificate recognizing his latest patent, and my mother was holding a printout of code that she had written. I think they would have been proud of what I built, I said. Not because of the money or the recognition, but because I used technology to help people who were suffering. I know they would have been proud. As we stood there on the patio surrounded by the laughter and conversation of our chosen family, I felt a deep sense of peace about the path my life had taken. I had lost the family I was born into, but I had gained a family I had chosen. I had lost a medical career that never felt authentic, but I had gained a technology career that felt like a calling. I had lost the false security of other people's approval, but I had gained the genuine confidence that comes from staying true to your own values. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from Marcus in federal prison. It was the first communication I had received from any member of my adoptive family since the night of their arrest. The letter was 12 pages long and filled with detailed apologies, explanations of his motivations, and reflections on the choices that had led him to prison. But the paragraph that affected me most was near the end. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, and I'm not writing this letter to request anything from you. I'm writing because I want you to know that spending 6 months in prison has given me time to understand what I lost when I chose greed over family. You were the brother I admired most, even when I was sabotaging your success. You had the courage to follow your dreams despite everyone's disapproval, and I was too insecure about my own choices to support you. I'm proud of what you've accomplished, and I'm ashamed of everything I did to try to prevent it. I read the letter 3 times, then filed it away in a folder marked Closure. I didn't plan to respond, but I was glad that Marcus had found some clarity about the consequences of his choices. 2 months later, Rapid Logistics was acquired by Google for $4.7 billion, making it one of the largest humanitarian technology acquisitions in history. I retained control of the company's operations and committed to using the acquisition to expand our disaster relief capabilities to every continent. The day the acquisition was announced, I received hundreds of congratulatory messages from friends, colleagues, and even strangers who had followed my story. But the message that meant the most came from Jennifer Walsh. Jed, I remember the night we first met when you were just a young man with big dreams and a laptop full of code. You told me that you wanted to save lives through better logistics, and I believed you, even though everyone else thought you were naive. Today, you've proven that dreams backed by determination can literally change the world. Your biological parents would be so proud of the man you've become. As I read Jennifer's message sitting in the office where I had spent countless 18-hour days building something meaningful from nothing, I realized that my journey had come full circle. I had started with a dream of using technology to help people who were suffering. I had lost everything in pursuit of that dream. And now I had achieved something beyond what I had ever imagined possible. But most importantly, I had learned that success isn't about the money you accumulate or the recognition you receive. Success is about the positive impact you make on other people's lives and the authentic relationships you build along the way. The boy who had been rejected for choosing dreams over expectations had become a man who could offer hope to anyone facing similar choices. The entrepreneur who had been sabotaged by his own family had built a company that could survive any external attack because it was founded on authentic passion rather than external validation. And the orphan who had lost one family had gained something even more valuable, the knowledge that love isn't about blood or obligation, but about people who choose to show up for each other consistently and support each other's authentic growth. As I finished writing the final chapter of my story, I realized that it wasn't really an ending at all. It was the beginning of a new chapter filled with possibilities I was only starting to imagine. I hope my story inspires you to pursue your own dreams, even when the people around you don't understand or support them. What dreams have you been afraid to pursue because of other people's expectations? Have you ever had to choose between family approval and personal authenticity? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their dreams are worth pursuing, regardless of who believes in them. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I wish you the courage to build the authentic life you were meant to live.